doing it by myself was not something that I found neither enjoyable nor particularly effective. It's lonely. When you have an idea that's counterintuitive and not obvious, there are going to be lots of people, quite rightly, with experience who are going to come in out of the woodwork and tell you, hey, you should stop. And so I toiled on this for a long time. I had the great fortune of a lot of incredible people around me, family members, different friends and collaborators, but I was desperate to find someone to do it.
Tim Brown is a co-founder and chief innovation officer of Allbirds, a footwear company whose sole mission, pun intended, is to prove that comfort, good design, and sustainability don't have to be mutually exclusive. In this episode, Tim opens up about the unexpected path that led him from playing professional soccer to building one of the world's most recognizable sustainable shoe brands. He shares how the resilience, discipline, and teamwork learned on the field has shaped his entrepreneurial journey and still fuels the vision behind Allbirds. He also reflects on some of the challenges of balancing purpose with growth and staying grounded in personal relationships. With hard-won lessons and insights, he offers us a candid look at what it takes to build a mission-driven business that lasts. My name is Buddy Teaster, President and CEO of Souls for Souls, and you're listening to the Repurpose Podcast, featuring candid conversations with business leaders who share the ups and downs, the wins and challenges they face along the way, and how they learn to overcome them. These are real stories of going from tailspin to tailwind. Great. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the next edition of the Repurpose Podcast. And I'm always excited about these. I love the conversation people get to talk with, but I am super jacked to have Tim Brown today, one of the co-founders of Allbirds and now their chief innovation officer and Souls for Souls partner, the company for almost 10 years now. So we go back a long way. And I just had the chance to hear Tim speak recently at one of their big sales events. And I didn't beg, that's kind of maybe too much, but I was prepared to beg to get Tim to join because I think his story is amazing. And so, Tim, welcome. Thanks for making the time.
It's a real pleasure to be here, buddy. Thank you for having me.
So, look, I guess we have to start where everybody does, and that's a little bit of your background because it is among the many things that are unique about your journey. How you got to shoes is hard to sort of get back to where you started. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, I grew up in New Zealand, land of lots of sheep, and it was there that I fell in love with a couple of things, sport and specifically football or soccer, depending on where you come from, and design. Finished high school, went to school to study actually architecture initially, and then had an emerging opportunity with football to come to America. So I took up a soccer scholarship, left New Zealand when I was 18, and came to study design at the University of Cincinnati in 2000. It was the best place that I could find to study sport and to study a subject that I was falling in love with. And I just had an incredible experience, and it was really the start of my kind of professional journey.
So when you finished, you're a footballer, you've got this design thing, you've got two of the big things checked. Which path makes the most sense as soon as you're finished university?
Well, I came to the end of my college career and had 4 amazing years at Cincinnati and an incredible design experience, an incredible design school, incredible professors and mentors that came out of that. But the sport was something that was important to me. I wouldn't say it was my love. I would say that was it was much more in the design and the creativity that I was studying at school. But the sport had gone well. I didn't get drafted coming out of college, and so began what was to be a fairly circuitous sort of journey to professional sport. I went to the LA Galaxy and MLS at the time, promptly got released, went to one of their feeder teams in Richmond, Virginia, went on trial in England, got rejected, and was quite frankly just about to give it up when I got an opportunity to play in the A-League in Australia for a team called the Newcastle Jets. And I got a 6-day contract. And
6-day?
6-day contract. The longest story is that there was a famous player for Australia who'd gone to a horse racing meet in Australia and got drunk and got kicked off the Australian team. And one of the Newcastle Jets players got called up, and so there was a gap for me. And I signed a 6-day contract, ended up playing in a game, playing quite well, and then ultimately earning my way to what would be my first professional contract. And the reason I was doing this, buddy, was in the background. I had tasted representing New Zealand. It was a place that where my family was, source of great pride. New Zealand had qualified for a Football World Cup in 1982, and there was this bold, visionary coach at the time who believed we had an opportunity in 2010 to do the same thing. So this seed had been planted deep somewhere in my mind, and I thought, gosh, to be a part of that. And as it turned out, I was driven to sort of be a part of that team, and went forward to make a career professionally in the A League and to play for New Zealand. And in 2009, we beat Bahrain to be the 32nd team to qualify for the 2010 Football World Cup in South Africa, and it changed my life.
Yeah. So you played in the World Cup.
In the World Cup in South Africa. In fact, this is a bit of trivia that belies New Zealand's uh, general humility. We were the only undefeated team at that World Cup, which is going to have people scratching their heads. But it was 3 draws, and the team that won, Spain, actually lost their first game, which was highly unusual. So we were the only undefeated team in the World Cup, even though we never got out of our pool. We had 3 ties, and it was an incredible experience. And I came out of that realizing that my sporting experience was never going to get any better. I
Yeah.
retired. I retired from sport shortly afterwards, and went back to London, where I was actually from, where my father's from, where I was born, to study all the subjects I'd avoided in business at the London School of Economics. So I retired from sport fairly shortly afterwards and started kind of the next chapter of my life right after that incredible experience.
So Tim, you said you sort of avoided the study of business up to this point. You've got a sport career, you've had a design career. What made you think that that was important? Because I can imagine it would be easy to have said, I want to lean into the design piece and the business is not for me.
Well, there's a couple of factors at play, and I appreciate that question. One, I was 32, so
Mm,
all of a sudden I was starting a professional career from scratch, quite a long way behind everyone else because I'd been up until that point effectively kicking a ball around for a living. The other thing that had happened was that while I was playing, I had embarked on what I would really call a curiosity project at the time, focused on shoes and shoes from natural materials. The idea that would, over many years later, become Allbirds, the business that I would found with my co-founder Joey. And that was a reaction a little bit to the number one reason, or the best reason you play sport at a high level, which is to get free gear, buddy. And but the free gear was from one of the big sportswear companies, and it was all made of plastic, and it all had logos. And so the starting point for this curiosity project was, could you make shoes with a simple design ethos, and could you use natural materials? And the material that I started with was one that was historically very, very important to New Zealand, and merino wool. And so I set to work while I was still playing, many years before I would retire, on this curiosity project to make a shoe out of wool. And so when I retired, I had this sort of itch that there was something there, and I was learning a lot and reading a lot about entrepreneurship, and also because I couldn't really get a job anywhere else. Um, uh, this was sort of another lane and part of the motivation to go back to school.
So everybody knows that it's super easy to design shoes, get them made, get them people to buy them and love them and grow into a giant company. So I'm sure that's your story for how it went from curiosity to Allbirds.
Well, of course it wasn't, but excuse me, had I known that all those things would be what they were, I wish I would never have. It's one of those ones. I had
Yeah.
no idea what I was doing. I hadn't written a business plan. I'd never made shoes before. I didn't grow up on a sheep farm, as good as that would have been for the story. I was literally a football player with not even an industrial design degree, a graphic design degree,
Oh,
who, yeah, who really sort of developed a vision for the product and set out, powered, I think, by naivety, or I know by
yeah.
naivety, to sort of see if I could solve this problem that really, as best I could tell, was mine and no one else's. And I think you can overthink these things, right? There's always, I mean, and I would bump into these in the subsequent years, 1,000 reasons why this was a bad idea and I was the wrong person to do this. But that's not how you're thinking. I was never. I just wanted to make something. It was nothing more than that.
So Tim, how did that intersect with your time at LSE, right? That's, well, I don't know if it's a pressure cooker, but there's a lot of smart people there thinking about ideas and how to turn them into businesses. How did that sharpen your ability to continue, like you said, to push past all the obstacles that you face? Or did that happen outside of business school?
Well, again, another very interesting question. I mean, I think I was 32 at the time, and I was going back with incredible motivation and curiosity. Uh, but I got a letter a couple of weeks before I started and said, "Hey, somehow you found your way into the school, but we're looking at your background and you've never studied economics before, and you have been kicking a ball around, and so we need you to go to these remedial classes." I literally, had to start from the back of the class, but I was driven. I really wanted to be there. I had a real sense of why I wanted to invest in myself after a
Mhm.
period of playing sport, and so that motivation, I think, was really, really important. The second thing that happened, it wasn't actually at LSE, it was on exchange at Northwestern University at the Kellogg School of Management. And I took a class with a professor called Carter Cast, who still teaches there, amazing guy. Um, and I took his class and it changed my life. And it was an entrepreneurship class, and everyone had to pitch an idea. We formed, I don't know, 10 teams of 6 people around the best ideas. Somehow mine got picked. I formed a team, and for 10 weeks, we actually thought about this not just as a pair of
Oh.
shoes, but as a business.
Mhm.
And Carter called me into his class at the end of those 10 weeks. And he said, "I've been teaching this class for a long time. I've seen a lot of ideas. This is by far and away the worst one. Shoes are too hard to make. Making shoes out of materials that you're trying to do that have never been used before is basically impossible. But for whatever reason, you seem like you're trying harder than anyone else in the class. So you should put this idea on Kickstarter so that it can fail and you can move on with your life, because otherwise I fear you're going to be one of these guys that just toils on this for many years and makes himself unhappy." And I was like, I walked out of the office going, he likes me. And I went home um, with $700 and the help of my brother, shot a video, put the 6 pairs of wool runners that I developed um, on Kickstarter, and thus begun the entrepreneurial journey called Carter's Bluff, and started what I had no idea would be this whirlwind experience.
Well, that's when our stories intersect, to just sort of underscore your sustainability commitment early on. I think it was somebody on your team reached out and said, "Hey, we're about to launch this. We need an option for what we're going to do with the stuff that comes back or is finished, and can we partner with Souls for Souls?" So we've known you since your Kickstarter days, which is kind of a fun thing. But Joey, can you, I want to back up a little bit, and you've already mentioned a co-founder. I know lots of companies have co-founders, but I think it's a hard thing. Like, there's lots of analogies. It's like a marriage, but there are all these things about how you make a partnership work. How did you come together with Joey? And I know you guys have been through a ton of change and transition over the last almost 10 years now. So just talk about how that relationship changed.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, doing it by myself was not something that I found neither enjoyable nor particularly effective. Um, it's lonely,
Mhm.
when you have an idea that's counterintuitive and not obvious. Um, there are going to be lots of people, quite rightly, with experience who are going to come in out of the woodwork and tell you you should stop. And so I toiled on this for a long time. I had the great fortune of a lot of incredible people around me, family members, different friends and collaborators. And so, but I was desperate to find someone to do it. And there was a couple of like false starts. And then eventually I met Joey. Our wives had been roommates in college.
Mm.
I'd met him at weddings, kind of in passing, uh, known him, but not really been friends with him. And he'd actually been an initial customer of the Kickstarter campaign, and
Oh,
quite a, let the record state, buddy, difficult and problematic customer who challenged me on many aspects of my emerging product. And, one of those things, I went to him for some advice. He gave it in a wonderful way. And for anyone who knows Joey, incredibly thorough. And and then 2 weeks later, rang me back and said, "Hey, maybe we should do this together." And what was interesting is that I had a vision for the product. It was very clear what I wanted, right, what I thought we could make. And he had equally a vision for a transformation of the economy, that we were going to, all of a sudden, a word like sustainability that I barely really even heard, let alone understood, that we were going to need to fundamentally rethink all the products and services that we used. And his view was that fashion was going to be the sharp edge of that transformation. And up until that point, which in 2015 was less obvious than it was now, the industry had been paying lip service to the idea of actually solving this problem in a meaningful way. And we connected on that. I had experience from my previous career in sport. It was one thing to want to do something, and I did. I wanted to play football. It was another thing to connect that with a higher purpose, i.e., playing for New Zealand and what that meant, and what and so I was searching for that broader sense of why I was making shoes out of wool, which was curious to me, but not purposeful at that moment. And so Joey gave the gift of the purpose, and it had a vision. And equally, we were two very different characters: an engineer and a creative, um, outgoing, confident person who, with an extraordinary amount of business knowledge and capability, and someone that tended to think more abstractly and creatively. And I flew to San Francisco quite randomly. We got drunk. He cooked me a lamb stew, ironically, and somewhat famously, and we decided there was a real opportunity here, not just from a business lens, but through the lens of purpose. And as you touched on, Buddy, we were so proud of the partnership with Souls for Souls. It was one of the early building blocks, along with becoming a B Corp, of starting to work out exactly what that meant beyond the intent. And so that partnership with Souls for Souls is such a source of pride for us. And as we've just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, a good example of how far you can take things when you work with great organizations and great people like yourself and Souls for Souls.
Well, it's been a pleasure and honor from day one. So I'm glad that we get a chance to say that to each other now, 10 years later. But I don't want to tell this story or hear your story just chronologically, but not only was Carter wrong, but 2 years into this, the Wall Street Journal calls it the most comfortable shoe in the world, right? So the growth was stratospheric, seen from the outside. And then you hit a rough patch, and now you're kind of rethinking and relaunching the product, and you're much more forward now, I think, than, at least it feels to me, than you had been. So, like, what was that up and down, and hopefully up, like for you? Because as we talked a little bit, this book that I just finished, this Tailspin to Tailwind, everybody wants to hear about the tailwind, but the tailspin, I think, is probably important to how you're rethinking and reimagining the future.
There's a parable, Buddy, the parable of the farmer, which I think is uh, really apropos, and maybe people have heard it, but indulge me for a second. There's a story of this farmer, and basically he's farming a small piece of land and with a singular horse, and for his small family. And one day the horse runs away, and the nearby village comes to the farmer and says, "What terrible bad luck! Your horse has run away." And he goes, "We'll see." And the next day, the horse returns with five other horses, and his son is breaking in one of these new horses and gets bucked off, and so tremendous good luck. And then all of a sudden, his son's training the horse, gets bucked off. The villagers come again. "What terrible bad luck!" And he says, "We'll see." And the next day, the army comes in recruiting for what would be a bloodthirsty war that led to the deaths of lots of young people. And of course, he couldn't go. So sometimes the things we think are really good for us, actually, in the fullness of time, turn out to be not so good. And it's only with perspective can you look back. And it's funny. Carter said it wouldn't work. Carter said it wouldn't work because I think out of a place of love, and he was pushing me in hindsight to go further than I thought I could possibly go myself. And the only way that he knew to do that as he got to know me was to push me. And of course, I could have I could have read that in a different way, and I could have missed what would become an extraordinary friendship now that's gone on for 15 years. Similarly, the early stages of founding Allbirds through that Kickstarter campaign. I mean, it was awful. I did the best possible job I could to spend my life savings. Like I made the women's sizes the same size as the men's size. just a bunch of just really painful things. And I look back now 10 years later with such pride, um, and such extraordinary love that came from my family in those moments to keep on going. And then Allbirds was a wild success, and we grew to be 1,000 people, and we went public. And there's been some real challenges on the back of what was a pinnacle expression, of business achievement. And we're now in a place where the brand is, I think, doing some extraordinary work, some of the best work it's ever done, and yet the world's looking at us like, oh no, we've lost our way. So that parable, look, it's is I think one example of you got to walk through these things and do it for reasons that extend beyond the ebbs and flows and the wins and losses that come on any given day, because you believe that what you're building is important and it matters. And that's what we've tried to do at Allbirds. And I'm not sugarcoating this or dodging any of your questions. I'm just
Yeah.
saying the perspective of time, I think, allows you to look at those things with a little bit more distance and perspective.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's um, that we'll see. That's a great parable. There's a reason that probably
We'll see.
hangs around and came to so quickly for you.
Is this a terrible moment for Allbirds, the end of, or is this actually where we needed to kind of reset,
Yeah.
reconnect with where we'd come from, that we'd lost our way a little bit, and it was an opportunity to create the next platform of where we wanted to go. It's what I believe. Time will tell.
So, Tim,
But
how have you thought about, Joey is still a board member, but he's not the co-CEO or CEO. You have a new CEO comes from the industry and brings a ton of experience. I had a chance to meet him. He seems super capable, and you're lucky to have him on the team. But how's that changed your role? How you think about what it means to be the co-founder as you sort of start this, I won't say next generation, but it's definitely a change.
yeah, I mean, I think all of these things, the way I tend to think about this stuff is, and have done with Joey, and when we ran the business together as co-CEOs, we tended to break things up into 3-year chapters. And we were, I think 3 years is a nice time because it allows you to sort of say, oh, I'm going to commit to that. And then at the end of that, I'm going to kind of ask myself a couple of really simple questions like, am I enjoying myself, and am I the right person to continue to do this? And we did that through a series of chapters, really three good ones at Allbirds. And then it was the right time for him to run it for a period, and then now, non-founder CEO. And I think we did that as best we could together, and made decisions that were that were team first, and also
Mhm.
balanced our own, your own personal journey. And I think generally we tend to sort of underestimate what we can achieve in the long run and overestimate what can be done in the long run. That's why I kind of think 1 year is the wrong way to think about things. I think 3 years is a nice period of time, and you make these commitments, and then along the way, your role evolves. And no one ever looked up, kind of my face in the dictionary and said, hey, that's the guy that should, be in a public company driving it forward. I think it's very, very clear that that there's better people to do that, and there's other ways for me to contribute. And yet you learn too, and anyone who founds a business will know that a co-founder it's an eternal thing,
Yeah.
and that you've imprinted a bunch of things on the business, more than you would probably think, in terms of
Mhm.
why it was created and what it stands for. And I think with Joey, we enshrined a purpose around the environment, around natural material innovation, and we now have a CEO that's taking it forward. And both of us, in different ways, are helping to shepherd that, and give it the best chance of maximizing its potential. So, I think it's like any entrepreneurial journey. None of it's um, is promised. It all has to be earned, and along the way there'll be different moments for you to take on different roles. And I think there's a certain comfort knowing that, and I'm very, very comfortable and very, very proud of what I'm doing at the moment to help the team.
Yeah. Um, so talk a second about your personal aspect of this. You've got a young family. Maybe you've gotten married along the way. I don't know when that happened, but we have a lot of people listening who are entrepreneurs, founders, leaders of different kinds, and I think that's a constant tension, right? How do you put yourself into this thing that you founded and so much of you is invested in, and you've got this other part of your life. How do you, I don't really think balance is usually the word, but how do you integrate those two parts of your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting question. I get asked about it a lot, and often it's framed in this idea of sort of work and life, and how do you make the two sort of work, and balance is often the label given to it. And I think inherent in that framing is the idea that work is bad and life is good.
Yeah.
And look, I'm a proud parent, don't get me wrong. And we have a beautiful 7-year old and 6-year old, and it is the center of my life with my wife. And yet I know sometimes it's fantastic to be on a work trip and to be working. And that's important, I think, for kids, particularly as they get older, to see that you've you're prepared to work hard and go out the door and
Hmm.
make a career. And oftentimes there's been incredible frustrations, as a parent, and equally at work. And so I think the first thing you can do is acknowledge it, and then I think you have to have a really clear sense of what the trade-offs are and what you're prepared to accept. I think oftentimes people tend to let that happen to themselves versus proactively, as they evaluate an opportunity, whether it be founder and entrepreneur or employee or whatever it is. These are the non-negotiables for me. This is my red line. And I think, we were fortunate, Joey and I, when we founded the business. He was a new parent. I was not at the time, but certainly aspired to be one. And we sort of set some fairly, bright lines for how we wanted to do this. And it didn't make it easy. Didn't mean that there was incredible sacrifices, particularly getting a business off the ground, but at least you kind of knew. And then I think once you knew, you understand that, hey, sometimes I'm going to be in the red and other times I'm going to be in the black, and you just got to monitor that as best you can. And so I think there'll also be periods. I've gone through a period of great intensity, and now I'm in a slightly different, as we touched on, with a slightly different role within the business, which affords me different time. And there'll be a moment where this will ebb and flow again. So long-term view, real clear sense of actually what you want. Um, and then oftentimes, I think the last thing I'd sort of say, and again, I talk to a lot of employees, this is not easy. This is everyone. This is a complicated world. Technology's at you 1,000%. Oftentimes you get tired and you think it's 100% change. Oftentimes, buddy, these things are they're edits and 5% adjustments here and there. And I'll be honest, coming out of even playing professional football, I was so eager to be out of the pressure and the scrutiny of being an athlete and playing, and then I missed it. You know, there's a, so the, human beings are complicated, and oftentimes I think the last thing I'd say is, if you're sitting there and you're feeling something's not right, well, you know, um, zoom out a little bit, think about this in 3-year chapters, make commitments, and then
Yeah.
adjust based on what's happened with a little bit of perspective. And then think about 5%, 10% adjustments can go a long way to your time and the way you use it and the way that you get energy from the work that you're doing or not. And oftentimes people mistake it for it's a complete change or a career pivot. Sometimes it is, more often than not. It's about editing and adjusting.
Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. I really like that, Tim. I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning of our conversation that we skipped over. Your sport career was a lot of no's. Didn't get drafted, the 6-day contract, all the things that you shared. Like we skipped over that, but there are a lot of people who would be like, okay, the universe is saying this is not for me, and yet you persisted. So I want to ask two questions. What kept you going in that aside from the New Zealand? Eventually that sort of you found some of your purpose there. What kept you going in that? And two, a lot of business leaders, I think, this is my opinion, overused sports analogies. But you're one of the rare people who's like, I was in it. I was a professional athlete. But I don't get that vibe a lot at Allbirds. I think that's a real core metaphor for business and life. So maybe that's wrong, but that's an interesting way to me. You didn't rocket up the football ladder of success, and yet you persisted and had this kind of success. And how does that translate into some of the things that you do now and talk about sport and what that meant to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two parts to that. The first part, I remember just again, I was in a phone box in Cardiff, Wales. For anyone who's been in like the United Kingdom in January, it gets dark at like 3:30 in the afternoon, I was calling my dad in New Zealand, which was on the other side of the world, the Antipodes. So it was of course, the best weather in a summer barbecue and the best time to be back in New Zealand. And I rang him and I said, Dad, I've just been released by whatever club it was. I think it was Bristol City or Swansea or one of the ones. And there was a long list of them. And I said, I'm kind of out of money. This is not really working. I think I'm gonna I think I'm quit. I think I'm done. I can't do it. And he said to me, great to hear from you. It's so sunny and warm. We miss you terribly here. We're having a barbecue. You can imagine it's absolutely wonderful. Everyone's running around. It's so sunny, so hot. And we're really proud of you that you've got this far with your football. Um, and if you want to quit, you should totally quit. I'm surprised that you've even gone this far. But don't call me for permission to do that. You got to you got to make up your own mind about about what you want to do. And I share that story because the purpose matters. I was like, I want to do this with a group of people that were my friends. I want to, if the New Zealand is going to be a part of this, this means something, and I'm going to go again. And ironically enough, the next day, 6-day contract was a couple of days. It was a couple of months away from getting a chance. And but I had to go inside myself. And yet the second thing was I had someone on the other end of the phone. And I think if I've had an unfair competitive advantage, it's been 2 or 3 people. In case my dad, my girlfriend now, my wife, Joey, that were there. You don't need 10 of these people. There's a couple of them that walk with you through this, and you know this, buddy. And they're on the end of the
Yeah.
phone. And sometimes you call them up and you say, "Hey, this isn't working," and they say, "Yeah, it's not, and you should stop." And sometimes they say, "No, no, keep going. There's some good
Yeah.
things here, just around the corner." And I've had the good fortune. You're not making these calls every week because if you are, there's a different problem. But there's 1 or 2 little moments, these inflection
Yeah.
moments, and I've had the good fortune of having a couple of people really close to me that nudge me, and it makes all the difference. All the difference. Can't do it without them.
And like you said, it's the nudge. It's a nudge. It's not. It's the 5 or 10% at that moment, right? That's ties back into what you just said. Like they didn't say, "Chuck it, no matter what, keep going." They're like they give you that 5 or 10% room.
Carter, this is where you have to listen, I think, beyond. Carter didn't tell me, "Oh, this is an amazing idea. You're going to knock this out of the park." He said, "It's probably not, but you're trying super hard, so you should take this a little further." And my dad didn't tell me, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. I totally understand it's hard." It's like, he's like, "Yeah, no shit, it is hard, but we're proud that you're doing that. And if you want to keep going, you should totally should, you know? And there's no shame in that." And so, so there's layers obviously to the stories I'm telling because I think it's also artful in the way that
Mm.
the advice was given. But those are the people that they tell you the truth, that truth tellers. And the truth isn't necessarily this is easy because that is not the truth in those moments. The truth is this is really bloody hard. The truth
Yeah.
is though we're proud of you and you're actually doing it. This is good. Keep going. And so I didn't get to the second part of your question, but
Right.
those people around you, you can't. I don't think that you can build anything of meaning without those things. And those relationships are often hidden. They're not obvious. They're oftentimes from the people that are meant to tell you the truth. They're often the ones that they're harder to be around, right? And yet they are essential, I think,
Yeah.
for achieving anything of substance.
Yeah, for sure, man. I sort of zoned out for a second while you're talking, Tim, because I went to a few of those conversations that I've had in my life,
You know,
right?
you know.
Where I called for permission or an answer and I got something totally different. And uh, it was transformational what happened out of that. And what I wanted was somebody to say, "Yeah, you're right. You're,
You're the
you
best
tell them.
buddy, and this is great. And it's like,
You're
no,
my
no,
best
actually,
friend." And they're like,
yeah,
"No, dude, you should lean into
no,
that because you are missing the lesson." And it was amazing what happened out of that. So, but let's go to the second part of the question because I'm not a sports person. I mean, that's not really been my background. But I use the analogies. I hear them a lot, but rarely do I get to talk to someone who's leading a company who had that background.
yeah. Look, I mean, I think there's layers to this. I mean, I do think, to your point, it's been a bit of a cliche in sports. Kind of shoot the goal, all the, whatever. Give me the ball in the last minute, whatever. There's a second click into this, which is much more interesting, which has been my experience, which is what it feels like, and this is my primary area of interest. To be on a great team. And I've got this general sense, buddy, that we talk a lot about leadership, and certainly in an entrepreneurial context, the cult of the singular leader.
Yeah.
And in my experience, we talk a lot less about teams, and we miss the idea that almost always a team is led by multiple people and forces, of which there's usually one public figure and many other highly influential components that are oftentimes hidden that we miss. And they connect a group and point it forward. And there's a mechanical strategic aspect to that, and then there's a sort of a spiritual and emotional kind of energy that comes when a group is kind of moving in the right direction. And again, oftentimes those environments are, and I know, I'm sure you've had this self yourselves. They're not always happy high fiving places. They can also be quite um, confrontational places. They can be quite honest places, but they are places that I think, for no other better way of saying it, are full of love and connection and a sense of shared purpose. And most importantly, and this is often the one we miss, a really clear direction around what it is you're going to go do and why you're doing it. And I've had that experience with in football and sport, and then very fortunately for long periods at Allbirds, not always, because it's a hard thing to maintain.
Yeah.
And I think that sport really was my education in that. And so I didn't really have another source of example, but I knew I'd felt it once and I aspired to feel it again. And so I think it was less jingoism and more, okay, well, what were the principles of that team? What worked in a sporting context, and how might we apply that to Allbirds? And with Joey as an incredible foil, we certainly
Yeah.
we aspired to build that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised. That's a thoughtful answer. So thanks for peeling that back a little bit. There's so many other things I want to ask, but I want to respect your time also and ask Joey, because I'm really interested in your answer. So a lot of times at the end of these kind of interviews or conversations, the question is, where do you want to be in 20 years, that sort of thing. I want to ask it the other way around. 20 years from now, because you're still pretty young, what do you want to look back at this moment and remember about now?
Oh, it's such a great question. Oh gosh, I think a couple of things. When I retired from professional sport, we were having a barbecue at my aforementioned parents' place, and my mum came up to me and she said, "Oh, I was so proud," and I had decided that I was going to retire and go on and do other stuff. She said, "We're so proud of everything you did with your football and your sport, um, but we're really looking forward to having you back." And I was like, "Oh, that one hit me pretty hard." Yeah. And I think what you realize is, and you'll be the same, and I haven't met a founder that isn't like this. Um, you got another level of commitment, and you can go into that, and it's good, but you can go into it to the detriment of personal relationships and maybe for your own health and well-being, which is a little bit to the conversation in your question, a very thoughtful question about balance. And you need to go there sometimes. I think you just need to be aware when you're there and the trade-offs and the costs to doing so. And so I think I'd look back on 20 years from now, and I think I've learned a lot from that. And I promised myself, and I didn't always get this right, through Allbirds, and Joey was a big part of it, that we were going to laugh and we were going to be where our feet were, and we were going to build really healthy, productive personal relationships at the same time we build really a healthy and productive, or tried to build a really healthy and productive business. And I think for the most part we held true to that. So I think I'll look back and say how I still got my sense of humor here. I never really thought I was that good, and I never believed I was that bad. And I've never forgotten where I've come from. I know exactly where I've come from, and we've had some successes and some failures and some ebbs and flows. But the people that grew up with me, and one of them is actually here right now, a college friend. I'd like to think that I haven't deviated from who I am, and I think I look back and be really really proud about proud about um, proud about that.
Great. That's a terrific answer. So, look, Tim, thanks for your time. I know there are lots of other stories that you could share. Maybe we'll get another bite of the apple of this sometime. But thanks for sharing some of that. And I don't know. I get the sense that you're an insightful guy and maybe don't always take credit for that. So I appreciate you sharing some of it, and um, hopefully inspiring a few of the folks listening to, I think, maybe be where your feet are. I think that's a great way to think about some of the wisdom that you shared today. And best of luck with Allbirds and whatever the next chapters look like for you.
And when your horse runs away, don't always necessarily assume that it's a good or a bad thing. Buddy, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for letting me share some of those perspectives, and such a thoughtful reflection. And again, I just can't thank you enough for the partnership with Souls for Souls. And one day I've got to turn the microphone around and I want to hear your story, because I feel like it'd be just as good, just as impressive, if not more so. So
There are no phone boxes in Cardiff. I can assure you there are none of those.
Go. All right, mate. Take
All
care.
Right. Thanks,
I hope we see you again soon, eh?
Okay, thanks.
All right, stay in touch.
All right, bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Repurpose Podcast with Buddy Teaster. You can learn more about what we do at s4s.org. And if you like this content, please share, rate, and review our episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts.